In more slightly less personally maddening NFL news, 1-10 start, which very disappointing. I mean, there weren't high expectations to begin with, unless you're an idiot who predicted them to go 12-5 and make the playoffs this season. Like, I don't know who would do that. But even taking that out of the considerations, 1-10, not great. Bryce Young has not looked like the quarterback he was projected to be coming out of the draft, and apparently 11 games in, canned according to been taking a lot of heat for this decision. I understand the impulse to fire your coach after winning one game out of 11 because that's rough, and the season has not gone the way that they've liked. But 11 games in is just it feels like you're not giving him a chance. And I'll prompt you up with this, Simon, in terms of what you think of this. Um, Urban Meyer, who was the worst coaching hire in the 21st century, lasted longer in Jacksonville than Frank Reich did in Carolina. Knowing that, do you think this is justified?
Um, well, like you said, their record is 1-10, correct? Right.
Yeah.
When did they win that game? Like, what's their streak right now? Because that's
They beat the Texans, and that was maybe like 3 to 4 weeks ago.
okay. Like, I don't know. I think I think that might just speak to the fact that Jacksonville probably should have fired Urban Meyer sooner than they did. But uh, I do think it was kind of deserved. Or if it wasn't deserved, I think it was the right move. Just with the idea that I don't know how much you necessarily want. This season has been a shit show for Carolina. I don't know how much you want to try and turn things around. Whatever you've been doing isn't working, and when you have a young quarterback in a system that just isn't working for that quarterback, you don't. That's obviously just a bad situation. I think if I was the Panthers, I would be wanting to try and fix that so that you don't break your franchise quarterback before it's too late, right? Because you want to get him set, right? And obviously, what they're doing right now just isn't working. You can also make the argument that maybe firing a coach mid-season just isn't great for a
Not
young
going to help.
quarterback's depth. Yeah,
It's not
definitely
going to
not going
help.
to help. So I think there's two sides to it, right? But I mean, 1-10 is terrible. That is a terrible start to the year. So I don't know.
1-10 is a terrible record, and I get what you're saying in terms of like just looking at the record, you can't question it too much. But I'm looking at looking at the bigger picture. Um, 11 games is not enough to prove anything in the NFL. I don't think you can, it's not enough time to build a team. If you're giving a regime only 11 games to get something right, then you're not giving them any chance. And in terms of the Panthers, I don't think their issue is the coaching, because Frank Reich has proven to be a good coach in this league, and I mean it hasn't been successful. It wasn't successful in Carolina, and Bryce Young has struggled. But I don't think that's necessarily entirely Frank Reich's fault. The personnel that Carolina has is just totally lacking. They've got their receiving talent hasn't really panned out the way that it's supposed to. You've got an aging Adam Thielen, who's their number one target by quite a long shot. Their offensive line hasn't been looking great. Like Bryce Young's not getting any help. Um, it's looked pretty atrocious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think you can do that. And to your point that you brought up, if I think the most important thing for this Panthers team is the development of Bryce Young, and to fire your coach mid-season, not only your coach but your QB coach mid-season, I think does way more harm than good, because you're gonna have to learn I mean, I don't know how much they're going to change, but you're likely going to have to learn a lot of new systems, like a lot of new everything, if you're bringing in a
Yeah.
completely new
And
guy to helm the ship.
just to
And
add to a
I'm
lot of the, and I want to jump in here just because I'm kind of looking at some stuff that I think adds a lot to this entire conversation. Because I think obviously with the whole Frank Reich firing, the main aim has been on how bad the offense has been. The defense has been terrible too. Looking at like how many points they've allowed on most of their losses, like back to back 40-point losses to Miami and Detroit earlier this year. They've lost more than a couple over 30. Like it's been rough. It's been rough to say the least. But the last time they only have 2 wins, or not 2 wins. Sorry, they only have 2 games where they've gotten over 20 points, which was both games where they lost
Yeah.
by 40. So you can probably make an argument that a lot of that is just based on garbage time.
Oh, and the Seahawks, because we like to play teams close that don't deserve it. But
Really? Wait, whoa.
that
Wait,
was
am I missing one?
37-27 week 3. That was Andy Dalton, though.
That is not on the game log over here. That's real interesting. That's fun. Okay, well then 3.
I remember that one.
Well then 3,
Yeah.
because for some reason the
That-
Seahawks
that-
aren't
that-
popping up on the game log. But
That's okay. They kind of deserve to be erased from the NFL.
oh,
anyways, it's
never
fine.
mind. I know why. I'm looking at Bryce Young's stats for the game log, so that
Yeah,
would
is
be
he-
why.
Yeah, because it was an Andy Dalton game.
Well, there you go.
Um,
So that's my bad. That's my bad.
Yeah,
But for the rest of the games, for all the games that Bryce Young has started in, I maybe should throw an emphasis on that.
yeah.
That is rough, especially.
Which is important.
And you also mentioned their last win, which was in Houston, where they only scored 15 as well. They also have the highest they have scored since that game is 13 in a game, and Bryce Young has only thrown 2 touchdowns in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
With
It's not
his
like
pick ratio
nobody's gonna-
being his ratio is 2 to 4.
Yeah, nobody's going to look at you and say that the Panthers have been great. But I think having this little patience for a team just like immediately makes your chances worse. So I think if you're looking at a coach firing, you're going to say, am I going to be better without this guy than I'm going to be with him in the next few years? And I don't see a possibility where the Panthers are better without Frank Reich, because they're going to be garbage anyways, because it was never really a coaching issue. They have terrible personnel, like I talked about before. And the other thing you have to think about is David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, he also owns an MLS franchise. He's fired 4 coaches in the last couple of years, which is just an insane rate. Because that's two. He's firing a coach every year for each of his teams. Can you tell me that there is any coach out there, like any good coaching candidate, who wants to go to the Panthers? And if I'm a coaching candidate that I'm getting like a bunch of interest from a lot of teams, Carolina is at the bottom of my list. They got a good, quality, proven coach in Frank Reich, and they sent him out the door because they think they're going to get somebody better when the hiring carousel comes around. But I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of head coach openings because there's a lot of people who are on the hot seat in the NFL. I think there could be as many as like getting close to 10 job openings with how many coaches are going to get fired. It's going to be a bloodbath. And do you think any of these potential, whether it's hot offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, any of these hot coaching prospects, are they going to go looking for Carolina? They're going to be looking at anybody anywhere else, because they know if they don't start producing immediately, which is an unfair expectation to begin with, they're going to be canned. It's not a fair system to build upon. If you're not given the roster, if you're not giving the time to build that roster and form the culture, I don't see any point in going to Carolina. If I was a head coaching candidate, I'd be avoiding it like the plague unless I absolutely had to.
Yeah, and I think I actually do agree with you on that point. I think especially it's kind of different in other sports to a point where, like in hockey, for example, in the NHL, there's not as big of a system change, right? That's very, very different. In the NFL, when you switch coaches, you are automatically ensuring that it's going to be a week, weeks before your team gets used to it. You have to learn a whole new playbook. You have to learn a whole new bunch of schemes. You need to learn all of these new things, and that's not something you can do in a week. Hell, not even a bye week, right? So that's always the big controversy or the big topic whenever a coach gets fired. For example, even with Matt Canada's firing, people were talking about the fact that the Steelers would be going into the next week with not a lot of time to figure out what their game plan was offensively, right? With a new person calling the plays.
Yeah.
But I think it is pretty wild. I kind of do agree with you on that point, that how how little it takes now, I guess. Because it has gotten a lot easier for coaches to get fired in the NFL, that's for sure. Not only
Yeah.
just in Carolina, but across the league.
Well, I do think it is kind of a Carolina thing because I mean, there you have seen coaches be fired um, relatively earlier, but I do think it's a special Carolina thing
No, it's
because
definitely, there is a special
Frank.
case here, but I do think just in general, I think the people are starting to get a lot less patient. They want to win
Well,
now.
I don't know because I would look at other situations across the league and I would see significantly worse coaching jobs that have been done for guys that have had their job for multiple years, where you have seen lots of patience. You've seen I think Arthur Smith is one of the worst coaches in the NFL who has a treasure trove of weapons of hit around him in Atlanta, and he's been in that job for I think 3 years now. They've had patience with him. You've got Brandon Staley who has one of the best young quarterbacks in the league and amazing talent all over the roster. And he's currently, I think, they're sitting at 4 wins. Like they've had
Yeah.
patience with him.
Although I will say with
It's
the
the kind of
Staley thing, I feel like he's probably the next domino out of all these coaches from what I've been hearing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked if Arthur Smith goes too, but there's been heat on these guys for years, and I've never even been the biggest Brandon Staley hater, but like there's been calls for his job for a while now, and people have been patient with him because people understand that it's a like people in management people in ownership especially understand that it takes time to build a culture. But the issue with Pepper is that he hasn't owned this franchise for more than 5 years. He doesn't know what he's doing yet. Um, and he's taken heat for that, and he is banning reporters from his press conferences that he doesn't like. It's just a complete mess in Carolina. It's just a complete mess. They're going to be very bad for the considerable future, not just because Bryce Young hasn't panned out, but just because the franchise itself is rotten at the core, and that starts with the owner.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that maybe they need to let somebody figure it out first. I don't disagree with you. But I also don't know. If you're not giving again, if you aren't giving Bryce Young the best possible situation to succeed, then you're doing everything wrong. And I think that maybe that's just all it came down to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just don't know. It's a big gamble to take. It's a big gamble to take because if you can't get a guy that is better than Frank Reich, which is a high bar, then this is one of the biggest blunders you've had because then because I think you're right. The most important thing is the development of Bryce Young. You're totally on point there. So if that's why you fired Frank Reich, okay, find somebody better,
Yeah.
and that's a high bar. That's a high bar.